Not every colonel ruled with paper and pistol. Some ruled with fear, and with the silence of victims who had no one to call for help. In those dry backlands of Brazil, young women lived under the shadow of a man who believed he owned everything: the land, the cattle, and women's bodies. The colonel would summon them, and no one dared to say no. Fathers stayed quiet. Brothers looked down, and the girls cried, with no one to hear them. But the Backlands have eyes, and that day the truth came out, not by letter, not by note, but by the mouths of the brave, people who could hake it any more. Lampião found out, and when Lampião finds out, he doesn't ask questions, he acts. That's how the night began. The night hell was born in the Backlands. Explanation: Backlands. The Sertão is a dry, forgotten region deep inside Brazil. It's similar to the American Wild West, arid, isolated, with little government presence, where justice was often taken into one's own hands. Explanation: Colonel. In that era of Brazil, a colonel wasn't a military man. It was an informal title for extremely rich and powerful landowners who controlled local politics, people, and land. They were like regional feudal lords. Before we begin, if this kind of story grabs your attention, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It really helps keep the legacy of the Cangacho alive around here. Now we're ready. Are you? No? Then steel your heart and come with me to the Backlands. Let's ride. The sun scorched the land mercilessly over the Backlands of Pernambuco, a dry day without even a whisper of wind, as Lampião and his band appeared, cutting through the fine dust hovering over the dirt road. Mounted and silent, they rode with rifles strapped across their chests and eyes sharp, scanning every rustle in the brush. They arrived quietly at a small village, as if just looking for a place to rest, and a sip of cool water before continuing their journey. That was how Lampião behaved when blood didn't call. He'd enter, drink, listen to the whispers in the wind, and move on. But that day, fate had other plans. In the middle of the dusty town square, between a little white church and a market shaded by a torn tarp, an old woman shuffled her feet across the ground, almost like a shadow. She wore a plain dress, worn by time. A dingy cloth covered her white hair. She kept her eyes low, as if even the ground was ashamed to hear the pain she carried. When she saw Lampião dismount, with bullets strapped across his chest, and a hat glittering with medals under the sun, she didn't hesitate. She walked to him, trembling, and dropped to her knees. "My son, for the love of God, listen to me." Lampião was surprised. It wasn't uncommon for people to kneel in fear, but what he saw in that woman's eyes wasn't fear. It was rage. It was pain. "Speak, ma'am. I'm listening," he answered firmly. She raised her face, took a deep breath, and with a low voice, almost a whisper, said, "Colonel Severo, he destroyed my granddaughter's life. She's only 15 years old. Her brother tried to defend her. Now he's lying there, between life and death. The gunman beat him until his blood stopped flowing, and the people here, silent. Whoever speaks disappears, just like her father. Vanished. It's been 3 months. Lampião widened his eyes, but stayed silent. "I'm not here begging, not for mercy, not for police justice. I'm asking for the justice of someone who still has honor. someone who does what must be done when cowards hide. They say you're a bad man, but I'd rather trust a bad man with honor than a good man who turns a blind eye." Lampião looked around. His men were quiet, watchful. The villagers were staring too, silent. The air was heavy, like a storm about to break. "Where does he live?" Lampião asked the woman. "Up on the hill, big house, full of gunmen. People call it the palace, but it's just a prison in disguise." Lampião leaned forward, took the woman's hand, and respectfully helped her up. "Get up, ma'am. Today, God sent a sign." She tried to speak, but all she could do was cry. Lampião turned to Corisco and Midnight, the two swiftest men in his band. "Follow the cattle trail. I want to know how many men are up there, what the terrain looks like, and how many entrances there are. But don't raise suspicion." Then he faced the group. "Nobody draws their weapon. No one raises their voice. Today, we are shadows. If anyone asks what we're doing here, just say we came to drink some water." The villagers watched from a distance, unsure if they should hide or be grateful. Some lowered their heads, others just stared, eyes wide open, as if Judgment Day had come early. Lampião then walked to the small chapel. He stopped in front of the closed door and stood silently. He touched the wood, looked up to the sky, and whispered, "If it is God's will, let the righteous be spared." At that exact moment, a gentle breeze swept through the dry leaves. A flock of birds suddenly took flight from a nearby tree. The old woman, watching, whispered, "He heard you, Mr. Lampião. He heard you." Lampião squinted. He felt the blood start to boil, but he knew. Anger is the enemy of strategy, and to face a powerful coronel, he'd need more than bullets. He'd need patience, faith, and time. That night, the band didn't sleep. It was the silence that comes before a storm. The village woke to an eerie hush. Even the roosters seemed too afraid to crow. People peeked through door cracks. Whispers filled the corners, but no one dared speak aloud. The news spread like wildfire. Lampião was in town, and unlike what many feared, he wasn't there to loot, nor for revenge. He came seeking justice. Coronel Severo Nogueira lived in a mansion atop a hill, with a wide, commanding view of the town. It looked more like a palace than a home. There were towers, balconies, warehouses, and even a private pond. They called the place the palace. But for those who lived under Severo's rule, it was nothing more than hell, covered in plaster and pride. Explanation: the palace. People in the Sertão often gave ironic names to places of power. The palace, in this case, was just a symbol of fear and oppression, not real luxury. Severo had been feared since youth. He inherited the lands from his father, a man of influence in the capital, and he learned early to use jagunços, like others, use a plow. Explanation: jagunços. Jagunços were armed henchmen hired by coronéis to intimidate, collect debts, beat or even kill in their name. They were ruthless and loyal only to money. But it was Severo who turned that town into a corral of silence. With money and gunpowder, he bought police, judges, even priests. And for what money couldn't fix, he had his jagunços, cold men, violent, soulless. It wasn't uncommon for a young woman to vanish for days, then return silent, her gaze distant. Some never came back. Others married strangers in a rush. like they were trying to erase any trace of what had happened. Those who spoke too much simply vanished. Those who cried were silenced. Fear was the only law. By late afternoon, Corisco and Midnight returned from reconnaissance, covered in dust, eyes sharp and alert. About 20 armed jagunsos, Corisco began. Some patrol the grounds, others lie in wait among the rocks surrounding the yard and the house. "How many floors?" Lampião asked, hand on his chin, thinking. 2 floors. The kitchen's in the back, with a separate entrance. The horses are tied near the pond. Out front, there's a wide yard, big enough for a church wedding. Midnight answered. "And the entrances, I need to know," Lampião pressed. 4 in the front. In the back, there's a side trap door the workers use, and an old tunnel that leads into the woods, but it looks abandoned. Lampião closed his eyes for a moment. The plan started to unfold in his mind, like a spool unraveling slowly. In the heart of the village, tension hung thick in the air. People didn't know whether to run, pray, or simply brace for the worst. But there was something different that day. A spark, a breeze of hope, a quiet wish to finally see justice done. Even if it came at the hands of the man who had once been the terror of the Sertão, Lampião walked the streets with his head lowered. But his eyes scanned everything. He watched where the jagunsos kept control, who spoke with whom, where the local police were hiding. He knew that a coronel like Severo didn't rule just by the force of arms. It was fear that fueled his reign. In the middle of the square, a young woman in a pale dress crossed Lampião's path. Their eyes met for just a moment. She said nothing, just lowered her head, and kept walking. But that look said everything, and Lampião's blood boiled again. That night, he gathered his band under a dry tree on the edge of town. This coronel thinks he's God, and these people, they've forgotten what it means to live without fear. Let's remind them. But to do that, we have to cut off the snake's head without letting it see the blade. Corisco looked uneasy. "You planning to charge straight in?" Lampião shook his head. "No. First, we vanish. Make him think we're gone. Meanwhile, we go for his bloodline. The workers, the cowhands, the ones tired of watching girls disappear and bodies turn up in the woods. We infiltrate." "And what if he suspects?" asked Midnight. "Then it's war. But it'll be a war with names, with faces. A war this town needs to see." That very night, 2 cangacheros, Ferrolo and Trinqueixo, were chosen to infiltrate the coronel's estate. They would pose as hungry cowboys, fleeing the drought, asking for shelter and work. They were smooth talkers. That morning, the 2 cangacheros prepared for the most delicate mission yet, to sneak into the coronel's lair. Lampião called them aside. Before they left, he handed each a small saint card, yellowed with time. "Keep it in your pocket. It protects better than a bullet," he said firmly. "And remember, this is justice, not revenge. We don't get to decide his fate." The 2 nodded silently and vanished down the trail, swallowed by the hot dust of the Backlands. Meanwhile, the village seemed to finally breathe again. The band had left, or so everyone thought. But it didn't fool the old woman nor the granddaughter, who now, slowly, rose from her hammock, her eyes still red, and her soul burning like fire, nor did it fool Lampião, who watched everything from the top of the hill, the healer's rosary, wrapped tight around his wrist, and his heavy hand resting on the rifle's grip. The sky dawned in a faded gray, as if even the heavens sensed what was coming. People began stepping outside, still unsure, walking slowly, with restless eyes and heavy hearts. The village hung between two worlds, the oppression that had crushed it for years, and the change, now blowing softly like a hesitant wind. Word of Lampião'S departure spread fast. To some, relief. To others, bitter disappointment. But no one knew that hidden among the dry trees and ochre cliffs of the hill, the band still breathed. That same morning, Lampião rode alone to a mud-walled shack, one of the most respected homes in the region. It belonged to Dona Arlinda, an old healer woman, with strong hands and stronger prayers. They said she could make evil bleed with nothing but a sprig of rue, and that no jagunço dared cross her threshold without tipping their hat. She was out back, facing away, blowing the thick smoke from a crooked pipe. Dona Arlinda didn't turn around. She simply said, "I know why you've come, Lampião, but be careful. Whoever messes with a serpent must know where to step." Lampião dismounted respectfully. He took off his hat and tucked it under his arm. "I came to find out if this path belongs to God or the devil." Dona Arlinda turned slowly. Her deep small eyes, like the bottom of a dry well, scanned him head to toe, like she could see straight through skin and bone. Without a word, she turned her back and walked into the shack. Lampião followed. Inside, the air was heavy. It smelled of smoke and fresh herbs. In one corner, a wooden table held saint statues, melted candles and rosaries twisted like vines. Dona Arlinda lit a candle. She whispered Latin prayers Lampião couldn't quite understand, then blew pipe smoke over a bowl of water. "I saw your path, Lampião. I saw blood, a courtyard in flames, and a woman's heart crying for justice. But I also saw a man surrounded by darkness." Lampião stayed silent, his eyes closed. She reached into an old chest and pulled out a black beaded rosary, each bead carved with scars from a razor. "This one's been through 3 wars and 4 deaths. It's not for sale, not for loan. If you take it, you carry it to the end." Lampião extended his arm. She tied the rosary tightly around his wrist, like a lifeline, then placed a wrinkled finger on his forehead, and murmured, "A spirit of pain will rise. But justice will only come from the one who suffered." Lampião frowned. "Will someone die, Dona Arlinda?" She simply replied coldly, "Someone will be set free." Outside, the wind blew strong, lifting dust and dry leaves, making them dance across the yard, as if the sertão itself took a deeper breath at that very moment. Lampião mounted his horse and rode off. On his wrist, the black rosary. In his pocket, the scapular from the old woman in the village, and in his chest, a growing desire to do something not for gold, not for revenge, but for faith. Meanwhile, at the coronel's estate, the party was already being prepared. Some workers swept the yard, hung colorful banners, and rolled out barrels of cachaça, Brazilian sugarcane liquor. The news spread quickly. Severo, Nogueira was throwing a party to celebrate his new cowhands. Music and booze filled the air, but beneath it all, there was suspicion. Ferrolo and Trinqueixo, the 2 infiltrated cangaceiros, were already inside. One cared for the horses. The other helped in the kitchen. They knew where the weapons were kept. Which jagunsos slept drunk on the porch, and which hallways were always empty at night. They passed everything to Lampião through a mute orphan boy who sold flour in the village. The kid, mute since birth, was the perfect messenger. It was he who brought the note. Party confirmed, Thursday, with booze, accordion, and chaos. Lampião read the note, burned the paper, and buried the ashes. He called Corisco, midnight, and 3 trusted men. Thursday is St. Anthony's Day. They say he's the patron of weddings. Well, we're gonna marry justice and gunpowder. Corisco chuckled, and the moon'll be full. Lights up sin better than a burning lamp. Lampião stood, looked them in the eye, and warned, we go in unannounced, while he's got his back turned, laughing, drunk on what he stole from others. That's when we show him what happens to those who think they're bigger than God. That night, no one slept. The band lay silent, hidden in the woods. Lampião, lying down, eyes wide open, felt the rosary tighten around his wrist, and whispered prayers no one else knew. There, in the dark, vengeance was ripening slowly, like fruit on the branch. On Wednesday, Alagoinha's sky darkened early. Heavy clouds gathered on the horizon like an omen. In the village, folks walked fast, whispering. The party at the Coronel's ranch was confirmed. There'd be food, cachaça, music, and no shame. Everyone knew what happened at those parties. That's when Severo got drunk on power. Poor young women were invited, some forced, others tricked, and some never came back. Out of fear, people pretended not to see. But this time, it would be different. Lampião gathered his men at a hideout among dry stones atop the ridge, with a direct view of the valley where Severo's ranch sat. The place was harsh, full of thorns, but perfect to see, without being seen. There, he drew the plan, sketching the dirt with a thin branch. Here's how it goes. When the sun drops, the party begins. The jagunsos, hired gunmen, will be drunk and armed, but relaxed. We split into 3 groups. One comes through the woods in the back, another through the kitchen cellar, and the third through the main yard. And what's the signal? Asked Midnight. Lampião looked at the sky. When the accordion stops, playing Corisco, leaning on a stone, chuckled, and if there's no accordion, then it'll be when the dogs start barking. They always feel it first. The group fell silent. This wasn't just an attack. It was a response, cold, calculated, wearing both faith and fury. Ferolho and Trinqueixo, the infiltrators, had already memorized the guard shifts. They knew which doors creaked, where the guns were kept, and who was the weakest among the guards. 2 of those jagunsos are all bark, said Trinqueixo. One of them, Malachias, shakes when he hears thunder. If we corner him first, the rest'll scatter like ants in fire. Lampião nodded. He pulled a red cloth from his bag, folded with precision. This cloth will be tied to the ranch's front gate. When you see it waving, it means the Coronel is surrounded. He paused, looked around at the men. They weren't soldiers. They weren't saints. They were cangacheros, Brazilian outlaws from the Backlands. But tonight, something was different. This wasn't about gold. It wasn't personal revenge. It was the Sertão, the Backlands, crying for help, and them answering. That man thinks he owns women, owns other men's children, owns the land, thinks he can trample on young girls' innocence, and laugh afterward. Well, that laugh will be his last, said Lampião, clutching the black rosary on his wrist. Corisco, always hot-blooded, stepped closer. What if the other coronets here we went after Severo? Lampião stared cold. Let them hear, let them shake, let them learn. The Sertão has no master, and from now on, anyone who harms innocent women will sleep with the devil. That night, the band split up. 3 went down first, dressed as cowhands with rusty rifles just for show, blending in among the ranch workers. 4 others moved through the woods, cutting fences and clearing paths. Lampião, with 5 more men, prepared for the central strike. The frontal assault. The mute boy, the one who delivered messages, was sent with one final note to Ferrolho, already asleep in one of the barns. On the paper, only one sentence. When the time comes, the accordion will go silent, and the Backlands will sing of justice. From the ridge, Lampião watched the ranch slowly light up. Lanterns flickered. People moved with trays. Accordion players tuned their instruments. Coronel Severo, fat, holding a cup of cachaça, was already laughing on the porch, surrounded by drunk gunmen and girls with sad eyes. It was a scene that had repeated for years. But that night, the stage was set for something else. The moon rose slowly, full, like a promise of war. Lampião, eyes locked on the big house, whispered to himself, "May God forgive those who deserve forgiveness, because what comes next is fire, lead, and redemption." The night fell hot and heavy, as if the Backlands themselves were holding their breath. The full moon cast long shadows over the dirt paths leading to the ranch. Up there, between oil lamps, screams and laughter filled the yard. The party had begun. The accordion cried loud. A blindfolded accordionist squeezed the bellows with fury, while 3 women with lifeless faces and fake smiles danced on the porch. The jagunços, gunmen, drank like damned men, some lying in the grass, others arm wrestling and laughing out loud, like they owned the world. The coronel's table, right at the center, was the richest: roasted goat meat, corn, flour, and bottles of cachaça. Coronel Severo, fat and bloated like a hog before slaughter, laughed with a red, sweaty face, a wrinkled silk scarf around his neck. "Tonight we forget misery," he yelled. "I run this place, and whoever don't like it, better turn beast and run into the woods." The men around him laughed, clapped, raised their cups, and from the corner of their eyes stared at the girls serving food. Meanwhile, the cangacheros were already moving like shadows along the edges of the ranch. Ferrolho, near the horses, was tending water. The trap was set. Trinqueso pretended to help in the kitchen, stirring pots of offal stew and pork cracklings. The 3 cangacheros, disguised as cowhands, were already mixed in with the other workers, waiting for the right moment. Through the woods, Corisco and Midnight crept low, sneaking between thorns and stones. A short whistle. They froze. Lying on the ground, the mute boy pointed toward the ridge. At the front gate, Lampião'S red cloth waved gently in the wind. The signal. Inside the party, Ferrolho saw the coronel raise his cachaça cup and shout, "Bring the new girl, the one who arrived last week. Tonight she dances here, or she sleeps in the slave quarters. Ferrolo's blood boiled. He knew. She was the old woman's granddaughter. The girl walked in hesitantly, head down, pushed by two jagunsos. Trinquexo, who had seen it all from the kitchen window, moved slowly toward the back door, where another cangachero waited, rifle wrapped in cloth. And then the accordion stopped. The world held its breath. A dry silence fell over the ranch. The coronel turned his head, confused, his eyes heavy with alcohol. What was that? Why did it stop? The accordionist stammered. The cord snapped. The coronel. But before he could finish the sentence, the first shot tore through the night. It wasn't a warning. It was an execution. The bullet went straight through the chest of a guard, leaning on the porch. Before the body could hit the ground, the yard erupted in screams. From the woods, the first cangaceros emerged. Shooting without missing, one jagunso fell backward, eyes wide open. Another reached for his rifle, but dropped with a bullet between the eyes. Ferrolo pulled a gun hidden in the horse trough and shot a guard charging toward him. Trinquexo locked the kitchen door from the inside and cleared the back with bullets, opening the way for the men. Carisco led from the front, face painted black, hat low, dagger in hand. He kicked down the main door. Midnight followed close behind, taking down two guards, hiding behind the cachaça table. And last came him, Lampião, eyes on fire, black rosary wrapped around his wrist, rifle across his chest. He walked across the yard like a priest headed to mass. He glanced sideways, fired, only when needed. "Nobody touches the women," he shouted. "If you run, you surrender. If you..." Whoever shoots, dies. The order was clear and just. The workers who weren't gunmen, nor tied to the coronel, dropped to the ground, hands on their heads. They knew the king of the Cangacho had his own kind of justice, but he never burned the innocent. The coronel, stumbling, tried to flee through the back door. Ferrolo grabbed him. "Where you think you're going, pig?" Severo growled, tried to fight, but took a rifle butt to the stomach and collapsed in the yard. The old woman's granddaughter saw it all, eyes wide open, shaking from head to toe. Lampião walked toward her slowly. "Don't worry, he'll pay now." The whole ranch was smoke, bullets, and screams. But the storm's center was right there. Lampião, eyes blazing, and the coronel, spitting blood on the dirt. "Tomorrow these people will wake up without a master," Lampião said, firm, staring down his enemy. "And justice hasn't even started yet." The early morning became a wildfire of gunshots, dust, and cries. Each second, another jagunso fell. In the yard, many still had cachaça dripping from their lips. The coronel's party, once full of mockery and sin, was now pure chaos. A war zone. Lampião walked among the bodies like an avenging angel, with a black rosary wrapped around his wrist, giving short, sharp orders. The living, tie them up. The dead, let the sun deal with them. The men obeyed. They were cangacheros used to hell. But that night, something different burned in their eyes. They weren't there just for loot, but for something greater, to give voice to the people of the Sertão. And the one who gave it was Lampião Coronel Severo, fat and beaten, lay in the yard, his face covered in dirt and blood. Two cangacheros held him by the arms. He still tried to kick, to bark orders. "I own this town. You're messing with big men." Lampião crouched down. eyes half closed. Own what, Coronel? Their pain? The poor girls? The silence? The fear? The Coronel spit blood and hate. I've got friends in politics, and the police. You'll pay for this. Lampião let out a cold laugh. No rush. Not more than they've paid. Those girls you dragged into this house like butchered goats. He pointed to the porch. Bring them all. They stepped forward slowly, cautiously. 4 girls, between 13 and 20, cornered in silence, their eyes empty. Lampião looked at each one with respect, lowered his hat. Today, you speak, and no one will silence you. The eldest stepped forward, trembling. He did it to all of us, said he could, because he owned the land and us. The townsfolk had started to approach the ranch in silence. They came slowly, step by step, expecting death, but they found justice. And then, from the middle of the crowd came the old woman, the one who started it all, holding the arm of her granddaughter, the violated girl. She was weak, but standing, with red eyes and trembling hands. When she saw the Coronel on the ground, something changed inside her. Lampião walked to the 2 of them and handed over a white-handled gun. Small, light. He spoke softly. I'm not the one to judge. Neither are my men. This is up to you. The girl looked at the gun, then at the Coronel, and wept. He killed my father, my childhood, my soul. Lampião nodded. So what now? You gonna let him laugh again? The girl walked to the Coronel, faced the man who once seemed invincible. He was shaking, begging, crying, but his tears were of fear, not regret. He tried to speak, but she raised the gun and fired. The shot was dry. The Coronel fell sideways, his eyes still open, as if he couldn't believe his own end. The silence that followed was complete. Then, a scream, not of fear, but of relief. A collective cry, a sob that seemed to rise from the cracked earth itself. Lampião took the gun from the girl's hands and hugged her tightly. Now this town can finally sleep. But the work wasn't done yet. He gave the order. Burn the barns, destroy the hidden weapons, tie up the surviving jagunços, and leave them at the town entrance. With a note on their chests, justice arrived before the law. As the men lit the fires, the sky began to brighten. The first light of morning tore across the horizon, turning that field, once filled with dust and pain, into gold. Lampião gathered the group in the empty yard. He looked around. The old woman was praying on her knees. Her granddaughter was being embraced by the other girls, and the people stood tall, with heads held high. Then he said, "Today you buried your fear, but don't forget, evil always tries to be born again." As he mounted up again, Lampião added, "Remember, justice also knows how to carry a shotgun." Carisco rode over. "What now, Captain?" Lampião looked at the sky, then at the rosary wrapped around his wrist. "Now we ride. Those who had to fall have fallen." They mounted their horses and left the ranch burning behind them. There was no gold, no loot, just smoke rising and the smell of earth. Renewed. The town awoke, tasting freedom. The sun was already high when the last horses vanished down the stone paths. The ranch's smoke still hung in the air, like a reminder. But now, What spread was a scent the people hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The news traveled faster than any of the Coronel's old orders. Lampião had brought justice, not with loot, not with fear, but with courage. By listening to an old woman, by giving voice to a girl, by reminding the sertão that not all power is eternal. People stepped out of their homes slowly, testing the ground beneath them. The plaza, once a place of fear, became a space for reunion. Families hugged. Elders wept quietly. Children ran, their eyes shining. The town had been cleansed, not with water, but with blood, sweat, and faith. In the church, for the first time in years, the doors opened on their own. The priest, who had long kept silent out of fear of the coronel, now knelt at the altar, tears in his eyes. One of the assaulted girls walked in, lit a candle, and said, "May this place never need bullets again to find justice." In the woods, from a high point on the dirt road, Lampião dismounted. He walked to a rock overlooking the town, rested his rifle on his shoulder, took from his pocket the scapular the old woman had given him on the first day, kissed it, and tucked it away again. "Mission accomplished, Captain?" Corisco asked. Lampião took a deep breath. God's missions sometimes come from the mouth of the poor. That old woman reminded me. It's not just revenge that pulls the trigger. Sometimes it's faith. He stayed silent for a moment, then took off the black rosary from his wrist and tied it carefully to the branch of a mandacaru cactus. This one stays to protect what we left behind. "You're leaving the rosary?" Corisco asked. "It's done what it needed to do here." He mounted the horse again, but before giving the order to leave, he turned to the group with a slight smile. "Now, let's vanish from the map, before someone gets the bright idea to call us saviors." The men laughed, quietly, as always, but more sincerely than ever before, and they galloped down the dirt road, like a procession, no saints, but with purpose. As they rode away, the town grew smaller, but the memory had already become legend. Months later, in distant corners of the sertão, people told the story of a village where Lampião didn't loot, didn't kill for gold, didn't steal maidens, but delivered justice with his own hands, and the courage to listen to a woman the world had forgotten. They said he left with nothing, except for a single note left at the church door, handwritten, in strong, steady letters. "Our faith is what sets us apart from beasts, and justice is what brings us closer to God." For many years, the village remained at peace. Fear never took root in that land again, because every time someone tried to abuse power, all it took was remembering that night. And so, the band disappeared into the trails of the sertão. They took no gold. They left behind no fear, only a story that still echoes like a fierce whisper through brush and dust. Not all power is eternal. Not all justice waits for the law. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice to change the fate of a people. If this story moved you, share it, spread it, because a true legend never dies. And in the sertão, some things are never forgotten until next time.